Hello everyone, this is Ao3 podfic, back with another podfic. Today I will be reading Again I Burn, Can You Reach Out by Captain_Autumn. This will be Chapter 3, Sleep. Summary. Wait, no, that's just notes. Okay, never mind. Let's get right into it. Leo turned around in his blanket for the umpth time that night, huffing in frustration. He was currently lying at his makeshift bed in the engine room, desperately trying to get to sleep and failing. That would be annoying enough on its own, but it was made even worse by the fact that he had actually been tired for hours and yet still couldn't sleep. His thoughts felt slow and sluggish, and his eyelids felt like they had weights attached to them, yet the second he lay down and shut his eyes, the blissful nothingness of sleep refused to come. It also didn't help with the fact that the wound on his side had started to hurt a little, a dull ache that didn't bother him too much during the day, but made falling asleep even harder. He wasn't entirely sure what had caused it, but he figured it was from him lying on it or using his left side during the day. As he lay in bed, his eyes squeezed shut in a last-ditch effort to try and get himself to sleep, Leo's mind wandered. If he was being honest, he was still pretty rattled by what happened that morning. Leo had never been good with people yelling, especially when they were yelling at him. Coach had said he had talked to Annabeth and Percy, and had told them to leave it be, and had passed on Leo's apology that he wanted to give to Annabeth, but had felt too scared to do in person just yet. Apparently it had gone well, or decently at the very least, after Annabeth had had a fair amount of time to calm down, and she had accepted his apology, and the two agreed to leave it at that. That train of thought then brought him to Coach Hedge, calming him down from his breakdown. If you had ever asked him before then who would be the best at comforting him, Coach Hedge wouldn't be that high on the list. He trusted the satyr a lot, but he would have never pegged him as the comforting type. And yet he had been able to not only stop Leo from panicking and calmed him down, but kept Leo calm enough for him to tell Coach Hedge his own version of the story. He had somehow done everything Leo needed him to do without Leo having to say a word, had known exactly how to help him and to keep him from spiraling. It had been unexpected to say the least, but it had been a good kind of unexpected, one that left him far happier than he had been before. Coach managing to figure out what had caused Leo's headache had also been a godsend. Leo had been worried when Coach left to get some water. He'd been scared someone would come in when the coach was gone, but having to leave the engine room and be more likely to run into someone had seemed even scarier, so he had picked the option to stay and have Coach Hedge get him water. After the first glass of water and a bit more time to calm down for the painkillers to kick in, Coach had left to get Leo a bottle of water for the afternoon. Eventually, the satyr had to leave to go do other things on the ship, but had made sure Leo would be okay on his own before he left. It was touching, and Leo had to try and hold back a smile for hours afterwards. It had been difficult to remember to drink, but sure enough, as the afternoon went on, his headache gradually decreased from a stabbing pain to a mostly ignorable ache. It had made his afternoon a much more enjoyable one, to say the least. He had ended up being so exhausted, both physically and mentally, that he ended up having a nap shortly after Coach left, which was probably another reason he couldn't sleep now, even if the nap had been barely an hour long. By the time he had woken up, he'd felt a lot better. He had even worked up the courage to leave the engine room so he could refill his water bottle, and even took a shower, leaving him refreshed, feeling clean and his mood even better than before. The rest of the afternoon and evening had been great too. He spent most of the time tinkering or drawing out some blueprints for bigger things he wanted to work on later. However, although Leo felt a lot better than before physically, mentally he was still exhausted and didn't have the energy to see anyone, let alone talk to them, so he skipped dinner. He wasn't feeling hungry either, to be honest, and so, while he had planned to dunk down after everyone else had finished eating and vacated the common room to get himself some leftovers or something, he hadn't felt hungry enough and had decided not to. He certainly hadn't been planning to stay up late and had fully expected to deal with his usual amount of trouble going to sleep, but nothing to this level. Usually it just took him ages to actually feel tired, but as soon as he did, he was able to fall asleep relatively quickly. But he tried to sleep when he was tired, but if he tried to sleep when he wasn't tired, it just wouldn't work. Now he was tired, his body actively screaming at him to go to sleep, but his brain seemed adamant on keeping him awake. So now he was here, tossing and turning with his blanket getting progressively more tangled around him, feeling like he was about to go insane from the conflicting things his body seemed to want. Finally, he decided to give up on trying to sleep right now and sat up with a groan, scrubbing a hand over his eyes and untangling himself from his blanket. It wasn't the easiest task, seeing as he was still currently very tired, but he managed without tripping over it, so that was a win in his books. Leo wasn't sure what to do next. He could just stay in the engine room and work some more, but because of how tired he felt, he didn't want to. His water bottle was empty, though, so he figured a good place to start would be filling it up. It was strange to be walking through the Argo 2 in the middle of the night. Everything was strangely silent. so different from the constant noise during the day, so even as Leo tried to keep as quiet as he could, any noise he did make felt like it was way louder than it actually was. Thankfully, Leo made it to the common area without a fuss. He filled his drink bottle up and had a drink, plus decided to grab a snack. He wasn't majorly hungry even after skipping dinner, barely peckish, but he knew he should have something to eat. The demigod ended up just grabbing some crackers before making his way out. Instead of going back to the engine room, though, Leo decided to head to the deck. He figured some fresh air might help. Plus, he had always found just looking out at the scenery a pretty good way to pass the time. So he climbed up to the deck, found a place to sit against the wall of the ship that was relatively comfortable, and got himself sorted. He looked out at the scenery, at the dark water and even darker sky, with the stars twinkling and blinking like flashlights in the sea of midnight blue, and the reflection of the crescent moon shining on the waves, looking like it came straight out of a painting. But as picturesque as the scene was, Leo just hoped his brain would get tired enough to let him fall asleep soon. When Gleason blearily blinked his eyes open, he wasn't sure why he had woken up. The sky was still pitch dark outside, the little window in his cabin. So he knew it wasn't morning yet, but he was honestly about to just shrug it off and go back to sleep when he heard a creak. It was so quiet that the only reason he heard it was the fact that satyrs had extremely sensitive senses, so a sound that a regular human or even demigod would barely hear was clear as day for him. Gleason tried to pinpoint which direction it had come from, but was struggling until another creak came, and he realized it was from the stairs leading to the deck. He could tell it was one person, and the person was on the small side due to the time between the creaks and how quiet the sounds were. That meant he was quickly able to narrow it down to one of the girls or Leo. It was highly unlikely that any of the girls would even be awake at this hour, and if they were, then it would be very strange for them to go to the deck. On the other hand, it would not be strange for Leo to still be awake, or to wake up at this hour, and though Gleason wouldn't have expected him to go to the deck, it still didn't seem as outlandish as if one of the girls, or even anyone else on the ship. Gleason slipped out of his bed and shrugged a coat on. It wasn't extremely cold, but it could definitely get chilly at night here. He also decided to grab a spare blanket from a cupboard in the corner of his room, and that he used for storage. A soft, fluffy one he knew Leo would like. He highly doubted that Leo would remember to bring a jacket up to the deck, so he wanted to make sure the demigod was warm and comfortable. He ducked out of his room, his hoofs making more noise on the wooden floorboards than feet did, so he knew Leo would hear him before he got there. But he had plenty of experience in walking around on hard surfaces that would make noise while making his steps quiet enough to not disturb or wake anyone, so he was sure no one else would wake up from the noise. Sure enough, when he got to the top of the stairs and poked his head out, Leo was sitting against a wall, his knees tucked up to his chest and looking out at the stars. The water bottle that Gleason had gotten him earlier was beside him, and Gleason was glad to see that it was half empty, while Leo was absent-mindedly munching on a handful of crackers. "Hey, Coach," the boy said quietly between crackers, his gaze staying fixed to the view. "Hey, Valdez," Gleason replied, just as quiet, walking over and taking a seat next to him. He understood why Leo was staying quiet. It felt like any noise louder than a whisper would shatter the tranquil serenity of the nighttime world. Leo was even managing to somehow eat his crackers quietly, though Gleason had no idea how, as the demigod finished off the last one in his handful, and took a drink. The satyr was secretly really proud to see Leo taking care of himself, even a little bit. Gleason was glad he had brought the blanket with him, because Leo was just in pajama pants and a t-shirt, nothing suited for the current chill in the air. Leo ran way warmer than a regular person as a fire user, sure, but that wouldn't stop him from ever getting cold, and Gleason could see goosebumps on Leo's arms. Gleason unfolded the blanket and draped it over Leo's back without a word. Leo grabbing the sides in his hands and wrapping the blanket tightly around himself, covering everything below his head and making him look slightly silly, though Gleason wouldn't say anything. He rested his chin on his knees and murmured out a quiet thanks, which Gleason just acknowledged with a grunt. "Why are you up, Valdez?" Gleason asked, though he kept his eyes on the horizon and not on Leo. He knew that when Leo had to talk about anything serious or personal, it was easier for him to not have anyone looking at him. Leo let out a deep, tired-sounding sigh. "I'm tired, but I couldn't sleep," he answered. "It was driving me kind of crazy, so I came up here for some fresh air." Gleason let out a sympathetic noise. He'd dealt with his own insomnia before. Not chronic like he suspected Leo's was, but it did happen occasionally, and so he knew from experience that it was the worst. "Any reason in particular that you can think of?" Leo just shrugged. "Not really." They lapsed back into silence for a bit, just listening to the quiet sound of the waves lapping against the hull of the boat and the wind whistling calmly by. Then Leo sat up and looked at Gleason in confusion. "Why are you up?" he asked, his eyebrows scrunching up and his head tilted slightly to the side in the subconscious way that made him look like a puppy. "Not entirely sure," Gleason admitted, "but I think it was your footsteps." He realized how his words could be taken the second they left his mouth, as Leo's scrunched up eyebrows went from confusion to guilt. "Hey, no, don't go feeling guilty on me now, Valdez," Gleason gently chided. "I worded it badly. I think it was your footsteps that woke me up, but I'm not certain. And if they did, then I'm not sure why, since I know there have been plenty of times the others have walked around on the ship at night for one reason or another, and I haven't woken up. Leo's face smoothed out, and he let out a relieved sigh, his chin moving to rest on the top of his folded knees once more. Ah, okay, that's good, he murmured. Thought I was being quiet enough to not wake anyone, but I guess I wasn't. Gleason let out a small chuckle. Oh, I don't doubt that you were quiet as hell. Satyrs just have plenty good hearing. It's both a blessing and a curse sometimes. Really? Yeah, Gleason nodded. Satyrs have senses that are way more sensitive than humans or demigods. Sometimes it can be really helpful, especially in a fight or as a protector, but sometimes it can get really overwhelming and be more of a hindrance than a help. Huh, Leo murmured into his knees. You learn something new every day, I guess, he added with a chuckle, which Gleason returned. Gleason had to admit Leo had made a good decision for a place to go relax so he could try to sleep. Sure, actually falling asleep out here would be a terrible idea, but the soft darkness, the quiet white noise of the natural world, and the fresh air combined to a very relaxing atmosphere, and Gleason himself could already feel his shoulders drop and his back slump against the wall as the natural tension he kept there evaporated. They stayed there for a while, mostly just sitting in silence, but occasionally talking about mindless things like contraptions or blueprints Leo had been working on, or Gleason CDs, and the possibility of Leo borrowing them now and then to use with the newly fixed sound system. It was nice. Gleason had always liked the small, peaceful moments he got with those he cared about, especially since his lifestyle and profession choice, they were few and far between. So he treasured this moment. Eventually, though, he had to ask, Valdez, how have you been since this afternoon? He gently probed. Leo tensed before relaxing. It was something he did a lot, and Gleason wasn't entirely sure if it was a conscious thing where he tensed up when he got nervous before realizing what he was doing and intentionally relaxing to try and hide his emotions, or if it was a subconscious way to soothe himself by tensing up all his muscles and then untensing them, getting rid of tension and stress in a way a lot of meditation instructed to do. The child of Hephaestus hesitated before answering. I did okay, he finally said. Not great by any means, but I had plenty of water like you said to do, and I managed to have a nap, which actually might be a reason why I can't sleep now, but anyways. And no one bothered me, so it wasn't bad either. You didn't come to dinner, Gleason pointed out. He had been worried when Leo hadn't come to eat, but given the boy's mental state at the time, he hadn't wanted to push it. Yeah, Leo sighed. I just really didn't want to see or talk to anyone then, he admitted. And I'd planned to get something to eat after everyone had left, but I wasn't that hungry, so I didn't. And that's why you had those crackers, Gleason guessed, and Leo nodded. I figured that even if I wasn't feeling hungry, I should still have something to eat, he explained. Gleason smiled. That's good. I'm proud of you, the satyr said, reaching his hand up and patting Leo's hair. Leo let out a small sigh and leaned into the contact, so Gleason started carting his fingers through Leo's hair, instead gently untangling any knots he came across. For the last few minutes while they had been talking, Gleason had noticed Leo had started to look like he was actually getting closer to sleep, his head sometimes drooping before jerking back up, blinking slowly with his eyes half-lidded and yawning constantly. Playing with the kid's hair seemed to double his tiredness, his eyes slipping almost entirely closed and his entire body tilting towards Gleason. Gleason adored the sight and pulled Leo the rest of the way in, gently pushing Leo's head down onto his shoulder and wrapping his arm around Leo's own shoulders so Gleason could hold Leo close while continuing to brush his fingers through Leo's hair. Gleason will admit that he ended up zoning out without meaning to, too engrossed in the gentle tranquility and almost domesticity of the moment. His heart full and smile tugging on the corners of his lips, the sounds of nature were always a soothing tune to satyrs, so he fell into his own half-awake daze, the only other noises being his and Leo's quiet breathing and the occasional barely audible grunt when Gleason's fingers teased out a particularly stubborn knot from Leo's curls. At some point after that, between the nature-induced calm and the sleep tugging at the back of his brain, Gleason started humming. He wasn't intentional by any means, and he hadn't noticed it through the fog of his thoughts for a while, so he didn't even know how long he had been doing it for either. Somehow Leo slightly drifted off on his side and made some sort of connection in his brain, and he had started humming a lullaby his mother used to sing him when he was a child. It had been such a long time since Gleason had heard it that he had no recollection of the title or any of the words. Before then he hadn't even known he remembered the tune either. When he realized that he was humming, his thoughts, which had previously been floating slowly between one thing and another, screeched to a halt, and he stopped. His throat closed up for a second, a potent mixture of nostalgia and grief pressing against his chest. It wasn't a common experience, but Gleason always had a similar thing happen whenever something special from his childhood was brought back to light. the love and fondness for the memory, combining with the bittersweet loss of childhood that came with growing up, overwhelming him temporarily. Gleason was broken out of his thoughts by a quiet whine from Leo, who Gleason now realized was right on the edge of sleep, but still mourning the loss of the lullaby. Gleason cursed himself out in his head. Letting Leo fall asleep here was not what he wanted, and even if he hadn't meant to, his hand in Leo's hair and his humming had clearly lulled Leo to sleep. He was still somewhat awake, but wasn't entirely asleep just yet, but barely. Gleason knew he needed to get Leo to bed now before he did actually fall asleep here. "Valdez," he murmured, "we need to get you to bed. You're almost asleep." Leo let out another whine, his eyes sliding open with great difficulty. Tired." "I know you are, but you can't sleep on the deck," Gleason explained. "No, come on, you need to stand up." With a fair bit of stumbling and half-asleep grumbling, the two managed to stand up, but Gleason didn't like the way Leo swayed from side to side and struggled to keep his eyes open. Leo still had the blanket wrapped tightly around his shoulders, but since the way it was wrapped meant that there weren't any corners of the blanket hanging down too long to be a tripping hazard, Gleason didn't try to take it away. Gleason also made sure to remember to grab Leo's water bottle off the floor. He wrapped his arm around Leo's back to try and help him keep his balance and not fall over, and nudged Leo towards the stairs. But after a few too many close calls of Leo nearly tripping on the way down the stairs from not being able to keep his eyes open enough to see where he was stepping, or randomly careening sideways as his regular struggles with balance were tripled by his tiredness, Gleason didn't think Leo would be able to walk all the way back to the engine room, even with Gleason there to help. He was just too tired, and Gleason could tell Leo was actively losing the fight against sleep. Without saying anything, he stopped Leo, moving his arm gently, resting around Leo's back further, up towards his shoulders. Leaning down to wrap his other arm around Leo's legs and pick them up, despite their height difference, it wasn't that difficult, although Gleason did need to adjust slightly and would have to be careful to not let Leo's legs smack into anything. It was just another reminder that Leo was far too light for his age or height, but now wasn't the time to address that. Leo let out a small noise of surprise at the sudden movement before his brain caught up and he sagged into Gleason's hold. His head falling into Gleason's shoulders as his eyes shut and he nuzzled into his shoulder with a happy sigh. Gleason's heart melted again at the sight, once again feeling like he was looking down at his son rather than just his charge. He took himself out of it, though, as he didn't really want to stand there all night, and started towards the engine room. He would normally prefer it if Leo slept in his room, and even if Leo was all but asleep right now, the comfortable familiarity of the engine room that Leo found soothing would probably help Leo stay asleep, which is what he needed right now. They made the rest of the trip to the engine room without fuss, though very soon after Gleason picked Leo up, the demigod fell asleep, having Leo curled up in his arms, asleep and vulnerable as he was, made Gleason's heart swell again. It was a bit of a struggle to get into the engine room without waking Leo, and a bit of maneuvering so nothing hit him, but Gleason managed thanks to the fact that Leo hadn't closed the door all the way when he left. Soon Gleason was next to Leo's makeshift bed and gently lowering the boy down into it. He grumbled a bit in his sleep, clearly not happy at the movement and the loss of Gleason's hold, but eventually Gleason got him settled. Somehow he managed to extract the blanket wrapped around Leo, though instead of folding it up and taking it back to his room, he laid it over Leo properly and tucked him in, leaving his regular blanket pushed off to the side. Gleason watched as Leo got comfortable in his sleep, rolling over onto his side facing the satyr and curling up into a ball beneath the blanket, knees tucked up as far as they could go and arms folded into his chest, one hand fisting the blanket and keeping it tucked beneath his chin. Leo nuzzled into his pillow as well, the same way he nuzzled into Gleason's shoulder earlier, before apparently finding a good position and letting out another happy sigh. Gleason stayed long enough to make sure Leo was settled fully, tucked comfortably under his bed, tucked up comfortably in his bed, with his breaths deep and regular as he slept. Gleason wouldn't admit it out loud to anyone, but he loved how relaxed Leo looked when he was asleep, no tension in sight and no walls keeping anyone out. He brushed his hand over Leo's hair with one last time, his still half-awake state putting a hold on his inhibitions as he leant down and pressed a quick, gentle kiss to the dark curls. "Good night, kid. I'll see you in the morning," he muttered under his breath, despite the fact that Leo wouldn't hear him while asleep. Before standing once more, there were still hours before he needed to be up, and he was still very much tired from waking up in the middle of the night, so he headed back to his cabin to go to sleep himself. And that was Chapter 3 of Again I Burn, Can You Reach Out? I will see you all next week for the last chapter of Our Broken Repair Boy, and I hope you guys all enjoyed this. Good night!